Struggling to buy a house, paying off that student loan, having to work longer. Let's face it, millennials have got plenty to worry about. In fact, most young people think they're worse off than their parents. So what? If your parents are richer than you, that's not totally surprising. I mean, they have been working and saving for longer. But are young people today doing worse than their parents' generations were when they were young? Well, in terms of wealth and housing, yes, they are. Studies show that the average wealth of young people has been going down. But there's more to it than just young and old. So what has changed? The average person born in the 1970s had built up a net household wealth of around £53,000 by the time they were 30. But if you're a bit younger, born in the early 80s, well, that figure would have dropped to just £27,000. Now, a big part of the problem was the economic crash in 2007 and 2008. That put a strain on everybody's finances. But millennials were hit especially hard. This is Laura from the Resolution Foundation. She says young people started feeling the pinch even before the economy collapsed.
Even back in 2007, before it began, young people's pay was already not improving on their predecessors' pay at the same age. So financial crisis is really, really big and really important in terms of what's happened to pay. But it's not the sole driver of the kind of feeling of insecurity.
Now the problem is people's wages just aren't growing that much, and that's affected everyone, young and old. So should the inequality debate really just be a battle between different generations? Professor Rowlingson from Birmingham Uni says we have to realise that there's also an imbalance among millennials themselves.
Some young people are on quite high incomes if they've gone through university, got jobs in, say, banking, finance, and we shouldn't, again, put all young people into one group and see them as a disadvantaged group. There are some young people who are extremely disadvantaged and struggling.
But there's no doubt lots of young people have got it tough. Some experts reckon this decade is set to become the worst for wage growth for more than 200 years. And it's young people's wealth that will suffer most. But at least you'll have a roof over your head, right? So what about housing? Now the problem isn't just that young people have less money. The house prices have absolutely skyrocketed. 15 years ago, a house cost 5 times the average person's annual income. Now, it's 8 times. And this has led home ownership among young people to plummet. Now let's just compare two groups of people in middle-income jobs. The first were born in the 60s. By 1995, when they were in their late 20s or early 30s, almost 2/3 of them had bought their own home. Now the second group were born in the 80s. When they got to the same age in 2015, the number who had managed to buy a house had more than halved. So as Laura suggests, for a lot of young people today, they may have no choice but to change their priorities.
In the longer term, the fact that millennials aren't getting into home ownership means they're less likely to be accumulating property wealth. Owning homes has been the biggest way in which people in Britain have built up wealth in recent decades.
And sorry to say, the problem looks like it's getting worse. Research says that by 2025, almost 60% of people in their 20s and 30s will be renters, not homeowners. So what about education? Being a uni student in England and Wales will usually set you back more than £9,000 a year. But for your parents, it was probably free. Tuition fees were brought in by Tony Blair in 1997, and even then, they were pretty cheap at first, just £1,000 a year. And if your parents didn't have enough money, you weren't charged anything. Students from England and Wales will now leave uni with an average debt of more than £50,000. And even if a lot of people don't pay it off, it's still a burden that their parents almost certainly didn't have. But there is, believe it or not, a silver lining.
An area in which millennials are definitely, on the surface, better off than their parents is in terms of how educated they are. They're the best educated generation in history. More of them have gone to university, probably a lot more than in their parents' generation. And that's something to be celebrated.
So you're likely to have some student debt to pay back, and your wages won't increase as quickly as they used to. But at least you've got retirement to look forward to. So what about your pension? Okay, so it's not the sexiest subject, but bear with me. When you reach your parents' and grandparents' age, you will need a pension. But Laura reckons millennials have reasons to be cautious.
They're not saving into the kind of secure pensions of the past. So I think the big concern for millennials is how to minimise the risk around their future retirement income, and things like how long they might live, the investment returns on their pension pots, and what inflation is going to do to the value of their pension.
Now, this might sound like young people have got a raw deal, but Professor Rowlingson says we need to be really careful about demonising older generations, because one day that will be us.
I think there are real dangers of exaggerating the intergenerational inequalities. Those younger people are going to be pensioners at one time, so if we cut the benefits for pensioners now, then that won't help younger people in future decades.
So what do young people think about their futures? Well, some surveys say that the majority of young people think they'll have a worse life than their parents. Some things have definitely gotten harder, like buying your own place, but it's really not that black and white. Millennials also get a lot of benefits. You're less likely to grow up in poverty, you're likely to live longer, it's way cheaper to travel the world, and the gender pay gap is much better than it once was. If you want to take out your frustrations on older people, just remember that one day you'll be old too. So according to this research, which looks at what it's like for young people in other countries around the world, it's young people in China who think they've got the best deal of everyone. 78% of them reckon that they will have a better life than their parents. Then right at the bottom of that research is France. So young people in France, almost 75% of them reckon that they will have a worse life than their parents. Right in the middle is the States. It's about half and half, so they reckon they're kind of on par. And then the UK is sort of at the bottom, so the picture varies massively.